I'm Grace. I'm 35 years old. And on my 35th birthday, my sister humiliated me in front of my entire family by calling me another man's mistake before sliding a DNA test kit across the dinner table like it was some kind of twisted party game. The room went silent. Everyone stared. And in that moment, I felt like I was 8 years old again, standing in the corner while everyone celebrated her. But this time, the wound cut deeper than anything I'd felt before. This story is going to hurt. It's going to make you angry. And if you've ever been the forgotten one in your family, the one who is always a little too different, a little too unwanted, then you need to watch this all the way to the end. Because what happened next changed everything. Before I continue, please like this video, subscribe to Revenge Queens, and comment what city in the US you're watching from. New York, Atlanta, Houston, Miami, Dallas, anywhere. I want to know you're out there. I want to know I'm not alone in this. Because for most of my life, I felt completely alone. Let me take you back. Let me show you how it's always been. I grew up in a house where love was rationed, where affection was currency, and I was always broke. My sister, Charlotte, was 3 years older than me, and from the moment I can remember, she was the sun in my mother's sky. Everything revolved around her. Her achievements, her beauty, her charm. When she walked into a room, my mother's face would light up like someone had plugged her into a power source. When I walked in, the light dimmed. It was subtle at first. The kind of thing you tell yourself you're imagining because the alternative is too painful. But kids know. Kids always know when they're not wanted. Charlotte got the ballet lessons, the piano recitals, the new dresses for every occasion. I got hand-me-downs and silence. When she brought home a B, my mother framed her report card. When I brought home straight A's, my mother glanced at it and said, "Well, that's expected." Expected. As if my existence was some baseline obligation, nothing worth celebrating. My father was there, physically at least, but he was always distant. Always working, always traveling, always one room away, even when he was home. I used to think he didn't care. Now I know he was carrying a weight none of us understood. The emotional wound that formed in those years never healed. It calcified. It became part of my skeleton. I was the unwanted one. The mistake. The child who didn't quite fit the family portrait. And everyone knew it, even if no one said it out loud. Until my 35th birthday. Until Charlotte finally said what had always been hanging in the air. I hadn't been home in almost 4 years. I'd built a life 2 states away. A life where I didn't have to measure myself against Charlotte's shadow, where I didn't have to see my mother's disappointment every time she looked at me. But my father had been sick. Nothing terminal, but enough to make my mother insist I come home for my birthday. "Family needs to be together," she'd said on the phone, her voice tight with something I couldn't name. So, I went. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I went. The house looked the same. The same cream-colored siding. The same azaleas my mother obsessed over. The same front door that always stuck a little when you tried to open it. But walking through it felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. The temperature dropped. The air thinned. Charlotte was already there, of course, playing the perfect daughter, setting the table with an energy that felt too bright, too performative. She hugged me when I arrived, but her arms were stiff. Her smile was sharp. My mother hovered nervously in the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she stirred something on the stove. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. Dinner was painful from the start. Forced conversation. Long silences. My father barely spoke, just pushed food around his plate with his fork. Charlotte kept making comments, little digs wrapped in jokes that made everyone laugh except me. Grace was always the serious one, she'd say. Never knew how to take a joke. And everyone would chuckle, and I would smile tightly and swallow the anger rising in my throat. Then came the gifts. My mother gave me a scarf. Generic. Beige. Something she probably grabbed at the mall an hour before I arrived. My father gave me an envelope with a check, his hand trembling slightly as he passed it across the table. And then Charlotte stood up, that brilliant, terrible smile spreading across her face like a crack in a windshield. "I have something special for Grace," she announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She walked to the sideboard and retrieved a small wrapped box. The room got quieter. She placed it in front of me with deliberate ceremony. "Go ahead," she said. "Open it." I unwrapped it slowly, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Inside was a DNA test kit, one of those consumer ones you send to a lab. My stomach dropped. I looked up at Charlotte, confused, searching her face for an explanation that made sense. And that's when she said it. "Maybe this will explain why you've always been someone else's mistake." The words landed like a physical blow. My mother gasped. My father's fork clattered against his plate. The relatives who'd come for dinner, my aunt and uncle, my cousins, they all froze, their faces twisted in shock and secondhand embarrassment. Charlotte just stood there, radiating satisfaction, her arms crossed over her chest like she'd just won something. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at that DNA kit, feeling the room spin around me. Someone else's mistake. The truth I'd always suspected, finally spoken out loud. Finally weaponized. Finally used to destroy whatever fragile sense of belonging I'd been clinging to. And before I continue, if this story already stings your heart a little, just hit subscribe. It helps more people who've lived through families like this feel seen. Because I know I'm not the only one. I know there are others out there who've been called a mistake, who've been treated like they don't belong. And you deserve to know you're not alone. I left the dinner table. I didn't cry, not then. I went upstairs to my old bedroom, the one that had been converted into a guest room years ago, erasing any evidence I'd ever lived there. I sat on the edge of the bed, that DNA kit still in my hands, and I felt something shift inside me. Not heartbreak. Not anymore. Something colder. Something sharper. Clarity. I started looking through the room. I don't even know why. Maybe I was looking for proof that I'd existed there once. That I'd been real. And that's when I found it. In the back of the closet, behind boxes of Christmas decorations and old photo albums, there was an envelope. Yellowed with age. Unsealed. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before. My mother, much younger, with a man who wasn't my father. They were standing close. Too close, her hand on his chest, both of them smiling in a way I'd never seen my mother smile at home. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, "Before everything changed." My hands shook as I held it. The pieces were starting to fit together, and the picture they formed was uglier than I'd imagined. I took the photograph. I took the DNA kit. And the next morning, before anyone else was awake, I left. I mailed the DNA test that same week. Swabbed my cheek, packaged it up, sent it off to the lab. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask permission. For the first time in my life, I was seeking my own truth, not waiting for someone to give it to me in pieces, wrapped in shame. And if you're still watching and haven't subscribed, why not? Tell me in the comments. I'm curious. Because this story only gets more intense from here, and I want to make sure you're with me for what comes next. The waiting was torture. 6 weeks for results. 6 weeks of my phone ringing with calls from my mother that I didn't answer. 6 weeks of text messages from Charlotte that started out fake apologetic and gradually turned hostile. "You're being dramatic," one said. "It was just a joke," said another. "You always make everything about you." I blocked her number after that one. I tried to go about my normal life. Work, errands, coffee with friends who didn't know what I was going through. But I was hollow. I was waiting for a piece of paper to tell me who I was. Or who I wasn't. The email came on a Tuesday. "Your results are ready." I sat in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store and opened the report on my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely scroll. No match. No biological relation to my father. No biological relation to Charlotte. No biological relation to anyone in the family database. I wasn't theirs. I had never been theirs. I should have felt devastated. I should have fallen apart. But instead, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. The truth was finally out. The reason I'd never fit, the reason I'd always been treated differently, it wasn't because I was broken. It was because I was never supposed to be part of that picture in the first place. I sent the results to Charlotte. No message. Just the PDF. She responded within minutes. So. That's all she wrote. So. Like my entire identity shattering was nothing. Like confirmation that I didn't belong was a minor inconvenience. I called her. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the smugness in her voice before she even spoke. Finally figured it out, huh? How long have you known? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Long enough. She laughed. Actually laughed. Mom told me years ago. I just thought it was time you knew too. You've been walking around acting like you're part of this family, when you're not. You never were. Why now? Why like this? There was a pause. Then her voice turned cold. Because Dad's getting older, Grace. And I'm not about to let some stranger take what's rightfully mine. And there it was. The real reason. The inheritance. My father's estate. This wasn't about cruelty for cruelty's sake. This was about money. This was about making sure I knew I had no claim, no right to anything. This was about erasing me before I could become a problem. I hung up. My hands were shaking. And then my phone rang again. My mother. I answered. Grace, please, she sobbed. Delete those results. Destroy them. Don't show anyone. Please. Why? I asked. Why would I do that? Because it will destroy this family. Because your father doesn't need to know. Because some things are better left buried. He already knows, doesn't he?
Silence. He's always known, I said.
That's why he's been distant. That's why he could never look at me the same way he looked at Charlotte. Grace. Tell me the truth. Just once. Tell me the truth. She was crying now.
Yes.
He's always known. And he chose to raise you anyway. He chose to give you his name. Don't throw that back in his face by making this public. I hung up on her too. And then I did what I should have done years ago. I hired an attorney. His name was Marcus Delacroix. Estate and inheritance law. 5-star reviews. A reputation for winning even when the odds were stacked. I told him everything. The DNA test. Charlotte's confession. My mother's plea. The photograph. The decades of being treated like I didn't belong. He listened carefully, taking notes, his expression neutral. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, Your sister has made a critical error. What do you mean? She's shown her hand too early. If she's already positioning you as an outsider, if she's already trying to delegitimize your place in the family, it means she's planning something. And we need to find out what before it's too late. If this story feels unfair so far, subscribe. Don't let YouTube hide stories like these. Your support keeps this channel alive. And trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Marcus went to work. He filed information requests, pulled financial records, made inquiries with my father's estate planning attorney. And within 2 weeks, he uncovered something that made my blood turn to ice. Charlotte had been attending estate meetings. Meetings I didn't even know were happening. She'd been working with my mother to restructure my father's will, to create language that would exclude me based on lack of biological relation. She'd been preparing to cut me out entirely. And she'd been doing it for over a year. Your father doesn't know about these meetings, Marcus told me. She's been operating through your mother, using power of attorney documents from when your father was ill last year. She's been forging his cooperation. I felt sick. Can she do that? Not legally. And not without consequences. He slid a folder across his desk. Your father has protections in place that your sister doesn't know about. He anticipated conflict. He prepared for this exact scenario. What kind of protections? Marcus smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just drawn a royal flush. An emergency meeting has been called. Your father's primary estate attorney is summoning the family. All of you, including your sister and her lawyer. It's happening in 3 days. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I barely slept. I couldn't eat. I replayed every memory, every slight, every moment I'd been made to feel small. And I prepared myself for war. The meeting was held in a conference room at the law offices of Whitmore and Associates, my father's estate planners. I arrived early. Marcus was already there, setting up files, preparing documents. My mother arrived next, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She wouldn't look at me. Then my father, being pushed in a wheelchair by a nurse, looking older than I'd ever seen him, but still sharp in the eyes. And finally Charlotte. She walked in wearing a designer suit, her own attorney at her side, radiating confidence. She looked at me like I was trash she'd forgotten to take out. The room filled with tension so thick you could choke on it. We took our seats around the conference table. Mr. Whitmore, my father's attorney, sat at the head. He was older, silver-haired, with the kind of calm authority that made you trust him immediately. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We're here today to address concerns that have been raised regarding Mr. Hartwell's estate and the distribution of his assets upon his passing." Charlotte leaned forward. "Yes, and I think it's time we discuss the fact that Grace has no biological." "Miss Hartwell," Mr. Whitmore interrupted, his voice like steel. "You'll have an opportunity to speak. But first, I need to read a statement from your father. One that was prepared 10 years ago and updated as recently as 6 months ago." He opened a file. My father sat motionless, watching Charlotte with an expression I couldn't read. Mr. Whitmore began to read. "I, Thomas Hartwell, being of sound mind, do hereby state the following. I have always known that Grace and Hartwell is not my biological daughter. I learned of her true parentage before she was born, and I made a conscious, deliberate choice to raise her as my own, to give her my name, and to love her as I would any child of my blood." My eyes filled with tears. Charlotte's face went white. "Furthermore," Mr. Whitmore continued, "I have been made aware of attempts by my daughter Charlotte to manipulate my estate planning, to exclude Grace from inheritance, and to use fraudulent means to access and alter legal documents in my name." Charlotte's attorney started to speak, but Mr. Whitmore held up a hand. "I have evidence of unauthorized financial withdrawals, forged signatures, and coercion of my wife to act against my wishes. Charlotte and Hartwell, you have violated the no-contest clause of my will. By attempting to challenge the inheritance I have laid out, by acting in bad faith, and by engaging in fraudulent activity, you have forfeited your right to any portion of my estate." The room exploded. Charlotte shot to her feet, screaming, "That's not legal. You can't do this. She's not even your daughter." "Sit down, Ms. Hartwell," Mr. Whitmore said calmly, "or I will have you removed." Her attorney pulled her back into her chair, whispering urgently in her ear. She was shaking with rage, her face red, tears streaming down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness. Tears of fury. Mr. Whitmore turned to me. "Grace, your father has named you as the primary beneficiary of his estate. The house, the investments, the business holdings. Everything." I couldn't speak. I looked at my father. He was crying too, but he was smiling. He reached out a trembling hand, and I took it. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I'm sorry I let you feel alone. But you were always mine. You were always my daughter." If you're still here at this point, just subscribe. Seriously. You clearly love good storytelling. Don't leave without supporting. Charlotte tried to contest it.
Of course she did.
She hired 3 more attorneys, filed motion after motion, made threats, spread lies. But the no-contest clause was ironclad. Every time she challenged, she lost more. And the deeper they dug, the worse it got for her. Debts she'd hidden. Credit cards she'd opened in my father's name. Accounts she'd drained. She hadn't just been planning to steal my inheritance. She'd already been stealing. Within 6 months, she'd lost everything. Her house. Her car. Her reputation. My mother tried to protect her, tried to bail her out, but even she couldn't stop the collapse. Charlotte had built her entire life on a foundation of lies and cruelty, and when it crumbled, there was nothing left. My mother called me once during that time. She confessed everything. The affair. The pregnancy. The choice to stay with my father, because leaving would have cost her the life she wanted. She asked for forgiveness. I told her I didn't have any to give. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And I chose distance. I chose peace over reconciliation. Because some wounds don't heal just because someone finally says they're sorry. I moved away. Far away. to a place where no one knew my story, where I could build a life on my own terms. I used the inheritance to start fresh. A new house, a new career, new friends who chose me because of who I am, not because of whose name I carry. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. My father passed away a year later, peacefully. And at his funeral, I was the one who spoke. I told stories about the quiet ways he'd loved me, the way he taught me to ride a bike, the way he'd always saved the last piece of cake for me, the way he'd chosen me, even when it would have been easier not to. Charlotte didn't come. My mother sat in the back, silent. And I realized I didn't need their presence to validate my grief. I didn't need their approval to know I'd been loved. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Thank you for witnessing my pain. Thank you for letting me be seen. If you've ever been the unwanted one, the overlooked one, the one who didn't quite fit, I want you to know something. You are not a mistake. You are not less than. And the people who made you feel that way were wrong. They were wrong about you then, and they're wrong about you now. Please like this video. Subscribe to Revenge Queens. Comment where you're watching from, and if you're brave enough, share your story too. Because the more we speak our truth, the less power shame has over us. And maybe, just maybe, we can help someone else feel a little less alone. My name is Grace. I'm 35 years old. And I am not anyone's mistake. Not anymore.